There's a sizable portion of the gaming audience for whom there's absolutely no beating the feeling of triumphing over a seemingly insurmountable challenge after hours of attempts. If you're in that group and own a PS5, luckily enough for you, there's no shortage of such experiences on the console, and here, we're going to rank them based on how difficult they are at their best, or at their worst, depending on how you choose to look at it. Do keep in mind that this list only includes games that are natively available on PS5. No PS4 titles that are only playable on PS5 via backward compatibility will be featured, so no Bloodborne either. 15. Hades. Roguelites love to push back against the player, and Hades does that quite effectively. Obviously, there's a lot of RNG involved, with the upgrades that you unlock across the length of any given run having a significant impact on how things pan out for you, but ultimately this is a game that isn't afraid to throw some real challenge your way. Number 14. Steel Rising. Steel Rising is definitely one of the most newcomer-friendly Souls-likes out there, but though it isn't as challenging as most of its peers, it's not a game that doesn't know how to put up any kind of a fight. Its clockpunk world is brimming with all manner of mechanical beasts and monstrosities, and some of them can be genuinely formidable foes. 13. Dragon's Dogma 2. Being openly hostile to the player is embedded into the core design of Dragon's Dogma 2, which of course means this isn't a game for those short of patience. The open-world action RPG isn't going to hold your hand at all, and even the simplest of things you take for granted in most other games will be tougher and more complicated than you expect here, from a bevy of deadly bosses and enemies to mechanics like Dragon's Plague, with deadly consequences to even something as simple as the highly limited inventory management. Dragon's Dogma 2 has more than a few tricks up its sleeve to make life difficult for the player. 12. Demon's Souls. The many Souls-like games that followed the genre's progenitor may have rendered it feeling a bit quaint in some regards in hindsight, but as its 2020 Bluepoint Games remake proved, it's still a timeless classic, more than a decade after its release. In many ways, it absolutely is far easier than pretty much every Souls-like game that From Software has put out since 2009, but in other ways, such as how checkpointing works, for one, it can be quite devastatingly unforgiving. 11. Lies of P. Lies of P isn't as difficult as Sekiro or Bloodborne, which are the giants that inspired it, but make no mistake, this game still frequently poses a stiff challenge, and for those not paying attention or properly leveraging its mechanics, can be quite a punishing experience. Though its many quality-of-life tweaks iron out many of the game's usual annoyances, it's in its combat and boss fights that Lies of P really starts asking questions of players. 10. Ghost Runner. One hit, one kill. A simple concept to grasp, and one that, as Ghost Runner proved when it launched in 2020, is an excellent one to build a game around. The first-person action game blends slick and fast-paced platforming and traversal mechanics with challenging combat encounters in truly impressive ways, and by adding things such as bullet deflections and slowing down time, it ramps up the challenge, and the excitement that much more. 9. Lords of the Fallen. Veterans of the Souls-like genre will likely not find Lords of the Fallen to be too difficult, especially compared to some of the genre's other offers, which we'll get to in a bit, but make no mistake, this is a grueling game for many who have tried their hand at it. From how hostile its world can feel as you traverse it, with even some of the regular enemies and mobs even posing terrifying threats, to how daunting some of the bosses can be, this is a game that knows how to push back. Some, in fact, might argue that it does that a bit unfairly at times. 8. Sifu. Slowclap's kung fu brawler has quickly turned into a fan favorite since its release in 2021, and a big reason for that has been the perfect tuning of its difficulty. At its core, the game makes every hit, every dodge, and every action feel weighted and high stakes. because even the smallest wrong decision can set off a string of deadly blows that can ruin a run. Meanwhile, outside of its inherent moment-to-moment difficulty, the game complicates things further still with its aging-up mechanic. Conquering Sifu's many hurdles is no easy task, but boy is it an absolute blast. Returnal. Housemarque has always been known for throwing players into grueling bullet hell gauntlets, but with Returnal, the studio did it in a 3D game for the first time ever, and it was one to remember, to say the very least. No matter which of its many biomes you're in, no matter which nightmarish boss you're taking in, Housemarque's sci-fi roguelite shooter is a nail-bitingly difficult game, and anyone who's unwilling to rise to its call for grit is gonna be in for a hellish time. Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. The Crash Bandicoot series is synonymous with difficulty, and developer Toys for Bob was very much aware of that when developing Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. Even on its critical path, the platformer has a fair share of stiff challenges for players to take on, but it's with its optional content that Crash 4 really lets loose in terms of its difficulty. Completionists in particular are likely going to end up having pulled all of their hair out by the time they're done with this game. 5. Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Team Ninja loves making things difficult for its players, in the most loving way possible, and it surely did that a fair amount with Wolong Fallen Dynasty, the Sekiro of Neo's Dark Souls. Wolong was built around the bones of a Souls-like, but changed up the moment-to-moment action with a great emphasis being placed on parry mechanics. Much like the overwhelming majority of Team Ninja's games over the years, Wolong Fallen Dynasty is brimming with bosses and fights that never seem to run out of ways to put players' skills to the test. 4. Elden Ring. In many ways, Elden Ring is one of From Software's easiest games. It is, after all, open world, which means you always have the option to go back and do something easier, or grind, or take advantage of its lenient checkpointing, or make use of mechanics such as summons and mimic tears that can make encounters so much easier. In spite of that, this is a game that will push you in ways that very few games will have ever done, especially if you seek out its many, many optional offerings. Elden Ring has some of the toughest bosses From Software has ever designed, some of the trickiest environmental challenges the studio has ever concocted, and that is really saying something. Three, Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. We're not done with From Software yet, because somehow Elden Ring isn't the most difficult game the studio has put out this generation. Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon is obviously very different from the studio's other games in terms of structure and gameplay style, but it's also brimming with some of the most terrifyingly difficult boss encounters we've seen in a From Software game.
That attitude won't get you far on Rubicon. Boat can pilot better than you sow.
Right from the first main boss, the game makes it clear that it's not messing about, and somehow the challenge only grows steeper from that point forward, right up until the credits roll. 2. Nioh 2. This is one of those games where criticisms of the difficulty almost being unfair are louder than they are for most others mentioned in this list. Team Ninja has developed many challenging games, but none as hard as Nioh 2. Sadistic enemy placements, overwhelmingly large mobs of foes, bosses with unreasonable attack patterns, and damage output in ways more than one. Nioh 2 will try to make life difficult for you. More often than not, it manages to not cross over into the territory of being downright unfair, but it doesn't always avoid that pitfall, and even when it does, it knows how to test your patience. 1. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Yes, we're including an expansion here, but let's face it, Shadow of the Erdtree is both larger and better than most other full-fledged games out there. It's also one of the most difficult things we've played in recent memory, even by From Software standards, which is really saying something. Even ridiculously high-level late-game characters are instantly humbled by even regular enemies walking around in the realm of Shadow, and there's no shortage of bosses that you'll be dying to ad nauseum for hours and hours on end. Shadow of the Erdtree was designed as a late-game ranking up for challenge for what is already a notoriously difficult game, and it delivers on the premise with great aplomb. That's all for now. If you enjoy what you saw, please hit the like button. And if you're new to the channel, now is a great time to subscribe. We upload brand new videos every single day. After subscribing, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time, right here on GamingBolt.